Have you ever wanted to get great, easy diagrams into your Markdown files or your Note app? Well, today I'm going to show you how to do that fast using Mermaid. Mermaid is a really awesome diagramming tool. It allows you to take plain text Markdown files and turn them into awesome graphs. The basic syntax is simple. For something like a flowchart, you specify that it's a graph, and then you start laying out what your nodes are going to be. So you'll make relationships like A points to B, A points to C, B points to D, C points to D, and that'll end up rendering you out a nice diagram that looks something like this. And that's all you have to do at a minimum. It makes it super easy to put together very simple diagrams, but you can also get more complicated with it. They have support for sequence diagrams, where you actually specify relationships between different actors. You can also get pretty complex and start making Gantt diagrams. You can make class diagrams about how different classes relate to each other. And you can even make Git graphs, where you're actually showing how a Git tree is laid out over time. For something like a simple graph, the syntax is pretty simple. You can specify a flowchart. There's different sorts of configurations you can do. You can style different types of nodes in the diagram. You can add labels to boxes to identify what a particular node in your graph looks like. You can have different shapes. You can have different styles of boxes, different styles of cylinders. You can even have circles and little flag boxes. All this can be done to really customize your graph and make it your own, make it fit your use case. The syntax for making connections is pretty straightforward. You're basically just drawing an arrow between two different nodes. So you might be drawing a pointed arrow. You might be drawing just what they call an open link, where you have just a straight line connecting two nodes. And you can even add text labels onto your links. You make all sorts of interconnections and get fancy with your diagram, or if you want, you can simply lay out every single individual connection and let it go that way. They have multiple types of arrows you can use. In addition to simple pointed arrows, you can also have circle pointer arrows and multi-directional arrows, if that's something you need in your diagram. And this allows you to make very simple flowcharts with lots of good information in them. You can even make subgraphs to have simple graphs inside of your overall graph. And you can get pretty fancy with this. If you need to add comments to your flow diagram, you can add those with a double %sign. And you can even go ahead and add CSS styles to your graph as well. And you know what? There's even support for fun, awesome icons in there. You can specify things like pie charts. You can create Gantt charts. You can define class diagrams. And Mermaid can even render user journey diagrams. I've primarily used the flowchart style of diagram, but I recently discovered they also have this Git graph capability. This allows you to show in your graph what a Git graph, what a Git history tree would look like. Here you can see a definition of a simple main branch with some work happening on the develop branch, getting merged back into the develop branch, and continuing along. This can be super helpful in things like readmes, where you're trying to describe how a particular workflow in a project happens. You can start simple, specifying simple commits and branches and how you're interacting with your repository. But you can also get really fancy and fine-tune how the graph is going to appear by specifying things like IDs, the branch names, and any sorts of tags or types that are happening at various points. They even have support for cherry-picking commits. Mermaid has an excellent live editor for testing out different functionality. It includes a number of different diagram samples, so you can play around with different types of diagrams, get some examples, figure out how you'd want to use these. It gives you the code, it gives you the docs, it allows you to play around with it, and you can even export that content directly into an image file or an SVG for inclusion into some other document. My favorite way of making use of Mermaid is actually through the native plugin integrations they have with a number of different editors, code repositories, and note apps. And you know what? While we're here looking around at the documentation, why don't we go ahead and submit a merge request that adds the listing for Obsidian, which is actually the note app that I'm using these days. Obsidian has native support for Mermaid diagrams as well, but that seems to not be included in the list. From the Mermaid documentation website, we can click on the little octocat in the top right. That'll bring us to the GitHub project for the Mermaid site. Based on a little bit of poking around I did, it looks like the documentation is in source docs, is where we're going to make our change. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to the integrations page, and I'm going to add Obsidian to the productivity section. Since this is just a simple one-line change, I'm actually not going to clone the repo, but what I'll do is I'll go ahead and click the edit button here in the GitHub UI. That'll fork the project into my user space and allow me to make a change directly to the code. And I think what we'll do is go ahead and add it to the end of the list of apps that have native support for Mermaid, and make sure to include that it's natively supported in Obsidian. After that, we'll come down here, make our commit, and go ahead and propose the changes. And that's it. That's how simple making a pull request to an open source project can be. In this case, a decently large open source project. We'll give them a star while we're here. Just as a quick bonus for those of you that are hanging out here to the end, to show a real example of how this would work in one of these applications. Typically, these start as code blocks in a markdown file. So if we start out with triple backticks, that's the character to the left of the 1 on a standard QWERTY keyboard. We can go ahead and specify that this is a mermaid diagram. And inside of that mermaid diagram, we're going to say that this is a graph. And it's going to start off with having 2 nodes. There's going to be an A node and a B node. And we're going to say that A points to B. And actually at that point, we don't even need to include the individual nodes. Then we can say that node B points to node C. And we could do things like say that A should have a thick line pointing to C. And that appears to render a little funny in Obsidian. Every once in a while, there's little bugs like that. Let's go ahead and change that back to a regular normal line. And there you have it. You can build your graph from there, build whatever other type of diagram you're interested in. And pretty much all the applications work pretty similar, where they have an edit mode, where you're actually editing the raw text of the markdown file inside of the code block, and also a preview pane showing what that diagram is going to look like. Sometimes you can view it at the same time. Sometimes you might have to click a tab to show you what that rendering is going to look like. And there you go. As you can see, there's a lot of flexibility with Mermaid. You can make all kinds of different diagrams, from fairly simple line diagrams connecting a couple of boxes, all the way up to much more complex diagrams that really showcase whatever your workflow is that you're trying to demonstrate. I recommend you check out Mermaid, especially if one of the applications you're using is one of the lists that has native support for it. Makes it super easy to start. A lot of those tools have built-in preview support, so you can go back and forth between working on your diagram and seeing what's actually being rendered. If you've never heard of Mermaid before, I hope this was helpful, and check back here for more content like this in the future. Thank you, and have a great day.